appreciate the handful of folks that are here. I hope it's not apathy that's creating the fact that we don't have more folks here. I blame it on the fact that we only have one real race in the council election, but we know that there's a lot of interest in the issues, street tax, et cetera, which we'll hear more about a little later in the evening. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Keith Cherney, publisher of the Valley Courier, and have been moderating these candidate forums for a number of years. I want to also introduce Kaylee Bogina with the Chamber. If you'd stand up, Kaylee, so people know who you are. She's an intern for the Chamber of Commerce as well as the Alamosa County Visitors Bureau. And Erin Keck, the director of the Chamber, is on vacation, darn her, so she couldn't be here, and Kaylee agreed to help, as well as Tom Monaco, who's the director of the Small Business Development Center. And I also want to recognize Holly Martinez, the Alamosa City Clerk, who helped put this evening together, and we'll hear from City Manager Heather Brooks a little later. I think it would only be appropriate in the case of an American election that we start the evening with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would just join me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So I think I would like to just start with the candidates just introducing themselves as their name and what office they're seeking. So Christina, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Keith. I'm Christina Daniel, and I'm running for City Councilor at Large.
Rob Waringdorf, I'm also running for Councilor at Large.
Liz Hensley, Ward 1 City Council.
Charlie Griggle, Ward 3.
Thank you, candidates. So just a little bit about the format that we're going to follow tonight. Each candidate will be given 4 minutes to introduce themselves, and we would like you to give your opinion on the 2 ballot initiatives on the city ballot, the streets tax and the marijuana issue, to save on questions being asked about those later to you individually. We will time it and signal you at the 2-minute mark, and again at 30 seconds. Tom will be helping me with that. Written questions will be accepted from the audience on provided cards. If you didn't get those cards, they're out there right outside the doors entering here. And I would like you to, in fact, I'll ask Kaylee to go around if your cards are filled out. I'll give you a couple more minutes on that because we've got to hear introductory comments. And then, Kaylee, I'll ask you to gather those. Questions may be directed to a single candidate or all candidates in a specific race or to all candidates. We, meaning myself, Tom, and Kaylee, will review the written questions to screen for duplication and appropriateness. Verbal questions will be permitted from local media, providing they identify themselves and the media they represent. And speaking of which, I would like to introduce our new editor, Daniel McKillop. Thanks, Daniel. When a question is directed to an individual candidate, their opponent will be given an opportunity to respond if they desire. I ask all of the candidates to give brief and concise answers so that we may be able to cover a lot of subjects tonight. You will be allowed a maximum of 2 minutes to respond to a question. After a brief intermission, maybe, based on the crowd, City Manager Heather Brooks will outline the ballot initiative in this year's city election, allowing for a few questions from the audience. We will plan to wrap all of this up no later than 8 p.m. All right, so I'm just going to go in the order that you were introduced for your opening comments. Keep in mind, we'll give you 4 minutes, and we'll caution you at the 2-minute and 30-second mark. So, Christina, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Christina Daniel. I have been a resident of Alamosa for 17 years. I have been on City Council for a total of 4 years. I was elected for the Ward 2 position 2 years ago, and then in the last election, I actually lost to Councilor Broyles by 1 vote, but the council reappointed me to serve in the at-large position for these last 2 years. So I'm running for the at-large position. I believe that what I can bring to the community is really a sense of equity and really talking about how we all come together to solve community issues. I don't think of the issues we face as Alamosa as specifically targeted to one area. We are all one community and all trying to work together. One of the lenses I bring is really about equity and fairness and justice. I believe that everyone who lives and works and plays in our community deserves to be able to tell us what they think about their community. And I want to ensure that everyone has access to that voice. The two areas that we were told to speak about were when we think about the streets tax. We know that our streets need work. We know that we have miles and miles of streets, and we know the amount of funding that we have annually is not enough to fix those streets in a fast basis. So while no one really likes taxes, we don't like raising taxes, I believe that a 10-year sunsetted tax for streets will help us get a lot accomplished in our community and will really make our streets safer and the connectivity better. As for the marijuana ballot initiative, as a member of City Council, when this came up for us, we spent a lot of time trying to be fair and reasonable and really tried to look at every angle of this situation. I personally believe that we should allow people to grow in their own backyard with the limits that we put in place. I think we have nuisance ordinances and other ways if it does impact neighbors or others. So I am not personally in favor of this ordinance or this ballot initiative because I feel like we spent a lot of time as City Council trying to find the best solution for the most people in our community.
Thank you, Christina. Rob, we'll go to you.
Okay, I'm Rob Waringdorf. I've lived in the valley all my life except for 6 years. Born in a little town, which really isn't a town anymore, called Mesita, which is south and west of San Luis. Went to school in Mesita, two-room school. Went to high school in San Luis. Went to Adams State, got my degree in Adams State in history, political science, and secondary education. In 1970, I married my beautiful wife, Susan Morgan from Sanford. We've been married for 48 years. It'll be 49 this year in December. We have 6 children. After I got through with college, I taught for 6 months in Antonito and knew that was not what I wanted to do. And so then ultimately wound up working for the Woolworth Company for 6 years in Oklahoma and Texas. In 1977, I had the opportunity to come back to work in my father's business, which we were mining lava rock in Mesita and on San Antonio Mountain for landscaping and gas grill barbecue rock. We sold the business then in 1981. I continued to work for the people that had purchased the business, went through a couple of 3 owners, and in 1997, it was time for me to leave, and so I opened up, was hired by Edward Jones, opened up an Edward Jones office here in 1997. Started out with 0 assets, and I'm in the process of retiring right now. And in that process, the branch had over $100 million in assets. I think that I bring to council a myriad of experience in business and in marketing and in the different things that I've had the opportunity of doing. I agree with Christina that the citizens of Alamosa need a voice with City Council. I plan to do that. I plan to be listening and to be aware of all the people and the things that they need. You know, I think that the initiatives that are on the ballot, the street, I would tend to agree with. The streets are not in good shape in Alamosa, and certainly sales tax is not the most equitable way to be able to do that, because those folks who earn less income are hurt the worst with the sales tax, but it's probably the best way to be able to do that. And it also, folks from the other communities who use our streets help us pay for that. As far as the marijuana issue goes, I am totally against marijuana. Medical marijuana may be fine, appropriately grown, but I feel like as far as growing marijuana outside, I think it is offensive. I think that neighbors and folks that are around, I don't think it's a good thing. And so I am in favor of the initiative of not having marijuana being grown outside of our residence.
All right, thank you, Rob. Liz, we'll go to you next.
All righty. Well, I'm Liz Hensley, and I also finishing up my 4-year term as Ward 1 City Council. While I was on City Council, I actually have been Mayor Pro Tem, so I am Mayor Pro Tem currently. I also, my very first year on City Council, really got involved with CML, Colorado Municipal League, and from the very first meeting I went to, I was like, this is really awesome. And within the first year, I actually got elected on CML Executive Board. And then within a year, I moved up and was treasurer, vice president, and this year I am president of CML Executive Board for state of Colorado. Really enjoying it, and I feel like I've learned a lot from both of those. One of the things that I feel from CML is I actually can bring both the idea of Alamosa, but also the San Luis Valley, and make sure to bring that rural concept and rural idea back to the Denver area and be able to share that with CML. But then also things that I learned from a legislative standpoint, bringing that back also to our community. So that's been a great asset, and I've really enjoyed it. Since being on City Council, we've done a lot of things, such as the ice rink, which is the multi-purpose rink. Right now it's turning back into an ice rink. The downtown plan, which is really exciting. Without a doubt, economic growth is really important for our city, and I feel like we're right at that cusp. Things are starting to happen, and there's a lot of changes that are making that happen, and so it's really an exciting time to be here. I've been here about 20 years in Alamosa. I've worked at different places. I was in the restaurant industry. I worked at Croker's Hungry Lager, started off there. I worked at the Grizzly Inn for Nacho Martinez for many years. He was one of the people that really encouraged me to go back to school. I got my undergraduate degree as a non-traditional student, graduated in 2005, went on and got my MBA from Arizona State, and then went on and got my PhD. While I was doing that, I worked at Great Lakes Airlines, at the Grizzly Inn, and then when Chili's opened up, I ran Chili's for the first 2 years, and I'm in my 12th year now at Adams State University. To talk about the 2 areas that we were asked to talk about, the first one is the street tax. I also am not a big fan of taxes, but at the same time, what I like about this one is it is very transparent. We used a street committee to identify the streets that need to be fixed. One of the things that came up is we have the same amount of miles of street as it takes to get here to Walsenburg. That's a lot of street to fix. And so with that, without a doubt, we can't do it the way we're doing now. We just don't have enough money. So what I like about it, it is very transparent. There's no question what's going to get fixed. The tax, if it goes through, we will know directly what it's going to. In regards to the marijuana issue, I do agree with Christina that the idea there is that we put a lot of effort into it to make this decision. We really balanced out all the pros and cons. So for me, that idea of we have enough policy and different regulations that if there is a nuisance, that it will be handled so it shouldn't become a nuisance. The thing that scares me is if we don't allow it to be grown outside, that it could be then forced to go inside to places, to houses that don't have the proper electrical, and that is a concern for me as well. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you, Liz. Charlie.
Thank you, Keith. I'll start off by saying that I was born and raised here in Alamosa, and the only time I've left Alamosa is when I went to the military. I came back, and back then, Sister Angela was a Catholic nun that had the position that I hold now, and she'd come over and visit with me and ask me if I would run for this position. And I gave it a lot of thought, and then she gave me the blessing for many years, and I started this job in November of 1983. And just to show you what we've gone through since then, we've gone from the old rotary phones to these fancy cell phones. We've gone from talking to people, which I think we've lost that, to now we email people and text people. We used to get these big old packets for council, big large packets, and now you get these little computers that have everything on it. So it's been a crazy deal. The city's come a long ways. You know, I've had the honor of working with a lot of city councilmen. I think over 40 city councilmen and staff, great staff. These people come, the council people, they come, they put everything they got on the table. That's our staff, the staff, they do a good job for you, you know. I was supposed to be here, probably giving my farewell speech, but I've reached a lot of my goals, and one of my main goals is streets in my area and the drainage system. And the last time I ran, I was trying to get that done, and this is how time flies by that fast. I wasn't able to do it. But then after visiting and coming up with this street tax, I think it's going to be able to help out. It seems like every year we go back instead of forward, you know, and we put $500,000 or more on streets, you know. So threw me out with the list. On the street tax, following that, I'm for the street tax because my area is the only area that has dirt roads right now. And on the marijuana question, we, just like these other two councilors said, we spend a lot of time. I'm for a win-win situation, and sometimes you got to give here in order to go ahead and get something done. At the end, the last thing I'd like to say is I'd like to thank my wife for putting up with me, because there's times when we leave the city council, you know, we've had some debates, you know. And this last time when I told her I was going to run again, you should have seen the look on her face. So, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Kaylee, if I could, you've got some already. Make another round and see if there's more questions out there. So, at-large candidates, what experiences and qualities best illustrate why you would be the best candidate to represent all Alamosa residents? And Rob, I think I'll start with you since you spoke second the last time.
Well, I think that, of course, I've been a resident of the city of Alamosa since 1993. And, you know, I think that, you know, I understand the different folks that live in Alamosa, the folks on the south side, the folks that live out west, the folks that are apartment dwellers. You know, they all have different needs and different things. And I think the experience that I've had growing up in Costilla County and also being here in Alamosa, I think that it gives me the ability to have a perspective for, you know, for all those folks. You know, and again, you know, I think the experience of being in business and having the opportunity of being able to deal with people of all walks of life has given me the experience that I think would make me qualified and would make me a good city councilman for the at-large population of Alamosa.
Thank you, Rob. Christina.
Thank you. I believe the thing that I bring the most of is really just a genuine caring and passion for all people and all humans, and think that everyone needs to have a place in our community to speak their truth, whatever that looks like for them. What I do is allow that space to happen and provide empathy. I have lived here for 17 years. I received both my master's degrees from Adams State. My husband has lived here his entire life. I believe that we can come together as a community to solve these community issues, and what I bring to the table is an ability to break down problems and solve them with listening to all sides and all perspectives. I have a lot of different experience with our various populations. I worked for 10 years at the Community Mental Health Center and really did a bunch of different jobs there, from outreaching families and youth to running grant programs to raising money to working with all of our community partners. One of the things that I value in our community is how collaborative we are, and one of the things I pride myself on is the ability to come to the table. And when I come to the table, I speak honestly, I speak from my experience and then experiences that others have shared with me, and ask questions about those. And then really listen to the answers so we can solve our problems together, not try to just place something on top because I heard something somewhere, but really diving in. I believe that the things that I bring that make me a good city council person is really to listen and to be present and to be open and honest with what is going on in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. This question is for all candidates, and we'll start with you, Charlie. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Economic development is the highest priority for Alamosa. If you don't agree, what is the highest priority for the city and the city council?
Well, like I explained, I started this job in 1983, and every year, that has been a priority for each of those councils. You know, it's something that it's something that we continue to build on. And even, we've come a long, long ways. Today, our council has put an economic development person in the city family, because that's how important it is to bring new jobs and bring how could I say it, bring more tourism and all this into our city, and not only into our city but the valley itself, you know. So I think it's very important. I tend to argue sometimes on the amounts, and you guys have probably know that, but as long as we're trying to do something that is great for our community and our valley, I'll totally support it.
Thank you, Charlie. Liz?
So one of the things when I ran 4 years ago, and I think that I've stood for the whole time I've been on the city council, is economic development. It's an area that's in my wheelhouse. It's an area I understand. I've done quite a few economic impact studies for Adams State, for higher education, for athletics. So for me, it is vital. At the same time, it is a priority, but obviously you got to keep it balanced with other things that are important in our community as well. But yes, without a doubt, I think our downtown plan is very exciting. I think having Kathy on board as our economic development resource person, having it in-house has been real exciting. A lot of things have already been happening. And again, like I said in my opening statement, is I think we are right now right at that cusp of some major changes happening, which will affect tourism, will affect what's happening downtown, which will also then affect what's happening throughout the whole city. So I think it's very exciting, and the ripple effect will be really helpful for also giving us more money to continue to do other things within our community as well.
Thank you, Liz. And I'll skip over to Christina.
Thank you. So do I agree or disagree that the economic development is the highest priority? I think one of the neatest things about being on city council is that it's our job to allocate limited resources to all of the priorities that we have in our communities. So we know that economic development will sustain and keep Alamosa growing. And we also know that in order to be that vibrant community, if economic development continues to grow the way it is, we have to have our police operations, we have to have our public works operations, and we have to be able to run the day-to-day things of the city. So absolutely, economic development needs to be on our list and allocating our resources to it without sacrificing the other things that make our city great, which includes things like public works and making our streets functional and ensuring that our city clerks have the ability to run municipal court and ensuring that everyone can get the tools they need to get their jobs done so our citizens and our community members can get the things they need. So it is one of our highest priorities. I wouldn't necessarily call it the highest priority because our city needs to run and function, but it's our job as counselors to balance those needs, wants, and wishes and make sure that everybody gets to understand why we're doing what we're doing and how it's getting done.
All right. Thank you. Rob?
You know, I would agree. I'm not sure that it's the highest, but it's right up there at the top. because economic development is the only way that we can be able to raise people from homelessness or whatever the thing may be. You know, the San Luis Valley and particularly, you know, some of the counties in the San Luis Valley are some of the poorest in the state and in the nation. And economic development is the only way that those folks can be able to rise above where they are, and that means jobs. And not only the jobs, but also, you know, the things that go along with that. We have a couple of great institutions in Trinidad State and Adams State that can train a workforce, because that's the other big thing, is having those people trained. I think Alamosa, the city of Alamosa, has certainly, you know, been in the forefront of helping economic development happen. When we had the private organization, the Alamosa County Economic Development, and that organization basically disbanded earlier this year and did bring a person in-house to the city of Alamosa. I think that was a good move. I think we have a good person involved there, and we need to get things, not just tourism, but we need to work towards light manufacturing and the other things that are involved in economic development. And I think that we have the places or the things in place to be able to make that happen.
Thank you, Rob. This question, again, is directed at the two at-large candidates, and I think you've probably mostly covered it, but I want to give you another minute or two to address this voter's question. What do you or can you bring to City Council that is different from the other members who already reside on the council? And Rob, will go back to you to start.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, that one of the things that I bring is, again, is experience in business. You know, certainly, you know, David and Charlie, you know, have run businesses, David with the bank and Liz, you know, with her experience, you know, running restaurants and doing those things in the Great Lakes. You know, those businesses that I was involved in were, especially with the business, the mining business, you know, that was a $10 million business that was being run. You know, and again, my experience with the way that those businesses were run and the things that they were doing, I think are varied from anything else that any of the other council members have, such as dealing with equipment and dealing with bids and dealing with some of those other things. You know, I think those experiences would help the staff and council to maybe be cognizant of some other things that we might be able to look at as a council to be able to make the city run more efficiently.
Rob, Christina, same question.
Thank you. I think the thing that I bring that is different than some members of council is that I've done on-the-ground work with many of our disenfranchised populations. In addition to being one-on-one with them and working with people who have addictions and people who have been involved in the criminal justice system or have behavioral health concerns or family concerns, I've also then moved up in organizations and helped with the systems work to make that better, to make those systems better and more effective for people in our communities. And so I have gotten to see from big picture down to the ground how our decisions impact people every single day of their lives. I also bring, I think, an empathy that because of the different experiences I have had growing up in a poor community, no, not in Alamosa, but growing up in a different community, being a member of a family, being a female first-generation college student, those are things that I can bring as a perspective that not all council members have. I have managed big budgets and I have managed small budgets. I have written grants. I understand what it's like to feel like you're outside as well as be a part of the in crowd. And so I think that there is a space and a place for a perspective about that I bring relating to those who live in our communities and live on the fringes of those communities, who haven't felt like they belong, who haven't felt like they're heard or listened to. And that's the space I think that I can bring because of the work that I've done and the experiences that I've had in the jobs that I've had. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Christina. This question is for all candidates, and I should preface that this voter is in favor of the street tax 2A. And we're going to start with Liz on this answer to the question, do you see a limit for how high the sales tax in the city should be?
So I'm assuming, like, do we keep raising the taxes? That's sort of what you're asking? I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
assume that that's what the voter is asking.
So obviously, I realize that adding this half-cent tax does raise the tax, and it is a, there has to be a cap to it. At the same time, I was definitely one who thought this was a great idea to have the half-cent tax, with the idea that it's going to make a difference for our streets. It's one of those things is that you got to weigh out the balances, and unfortunately, the way budgets are is every now and then you're going to have to raise the tax a little bit to make those adjustments. For me, the real important thing is that it's transparent. Having a tax that sort of covers everything and we say it's going to be a catch-all, that to me is something I'm not for. It would probably have to be something critical again and very transparent if I was to vote for another tax to go through or to add to the tax. But again, I do think this one is very vital and so supportive. I'm glad the person who asked the question is also supportive of it.
Thank you, Liz. Charlie, let's go to you next.
Okay. I too am against, I'm against taxes, okay? But when there's a shortage of money, you gotta find a way how to fix your streets, fix the infrastructure. And with this tax here, it sunsets. You know, you have to go back to the voter and ask the voter again, you know, did we do a good job with the first part? Are we doing the job right? You know, and ask them if they want to go ahead and vote for it again. So there is a limit. It is a cap. You know, we've in the past we've done a rec tax that has done wonders. It's done a lot for this community and for the valley. It's helped the golf course, which is an economic development deal. You know, it's built this all-purpose pavilion that sometimes they call the ice skating rink. But it's something that I feel that it's almost like a last alternative. And one thing too that is great is that people that come through our community help us pay for a lot of this stuff. And so I believe that there should be some kind of cap on it, and that sunset will allow the people to come again and tell them and ask to see if they want to continue or not.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Rob, your take?
You know, yes, I mean, I don't think that the city can continue to raise sales tax. I mean, you know, we have a loss that we lose to Pueblo. You know, people go across the hill to do various things as far as shopping. I'm not sure that the sales tax is the reason why, but part of it is. And so we need to be cognizant of what that sales tax is. And I would not be in favor of raising it from the point that it is currently. You know, I think that you know, the sunset is good. And the thing is when you look at, and Heather does present, you know, the first 10 years, we're just going to touch a little portion of the streets that need to be fixed in Alamosa. So if we're still cognizant of the need for street repair and good streets, we're going to have to do it for another 10 years, another 10 years, and another 10 years. And I think the thing that's important is that as these streets are fixed, that we make a concerted effort with the folks who are responsible for that they continue to be maintained. And again, in Heather's presentation, which I've heard, a street should last for 30 years with you know, overlay, chip seal, and different things. And I think that we need to be very cognizant of the streets that we fix, that we continue to make them or have them run that life of 30 years. And I think that's something that council needs to be very much aware of.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Rob. Christina.
Thank you. I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that in other comparable communities, with this addition, Alamosa becomes one of the highest sales tax rates in comparable communities. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that and to recognize that as council members, we have to be very, very diligent and responsible when we're looking at any kind of tax increase or any kind of rate increase at all to improve our operations or to do the things that we need to do to run the city. I think that it is premature to say we would never want to raise that again. Should there be a reason for that to happen, we would need to consider that the way we can consider every single issue. I'm not in favor of raising taxes. I'm not wanting to do that, but I also think setting blanket statements sets us up for failure and then not keeping our promises that we said. I believe that the sales tax that we are asking for in this situation is very important to maintain our streets. And I think Mr. Orringdorf is right. We know this isn't going to get us as far as we need to be. We know with the sunset in 10 years, we're going to be asking for there to be a consideration for the community to continue this same rate of tax because we need to fix all of the streets. And so I think that there's just being real and open and honest and transparent about what our needs are as a community is important, but never setting ourselves up so we unintentionally lie or have unintended consequences by not being real and open to the possibilities of the future.
Thank you, candidates. And I think, pardon me, with that question, it may be an appropriate time to call on Heather Brooks to address the street tax.
Okay, so since we are filming this, I'm actually using a microphone, even though I don't think I need one. Keith gave me clear direction to cut it in half and to go quickly. And so the postcards you have on your seats has most of the information that's going to be in these slides, but I am available for questions as well, but I want to make the most of our time here tonight. So what's been discussed already tonight is a 1/2-cent dedicated street tax that will be put before the voters. The ballots go out next week, and so it's coming soon. It does have a 10-year sunset. We estimate that the tax will generate about $1.3 million annually. It will become effective immediately if approved by the voters. And what it means from a shopper perspective, if someone spends $2, they would pay an extra 1 cent that would be dedicated entirely for the street projects. If someone spent $10, it would be an extra 5 cents for streets. And if someone spent $100, it would be an extra 50 cents for those streets. As shared, one of the reasons that the City Council considered a sales tax compared to some of the other revenue sources is because about half of that 1.3 would be paid by non-residents who do use our streets. And so they felt that that was a fair way to help maintain the streets. We wanted to make sure that we are very, very clear that 100%, every penny that comes in from this 1/2-cent dedicated tax will go into its own fund called the Streets Trust Fund. It will not be commingled with other city funds like the General Fund, Enterprise Fund, or anything else. It will go into its own fund, and then it can only be used in those items of Resolution 13, which I will get to here in a second. Additionally, City Council wasn't interested in a shell game where they ask voters to increase the tax over here and they decrease their spending over in the general fund. So what they've committed to in this same resolution is to continue paying at $500,000 from the general fund over into that street trust fund. So they're not going to reduce that support. But how did we even get here? It started when we did our outreach for the comprehensive plan and asking residents how they thought we were doing on our services. And when it came to streets, we are not doing very well. And I think anyone who's driven on the streets in the community is probably not surprised by that. At the same time, when we asked about priorities, sidewalks and bike lanes, smoother roads were high priorities from the residents. And so what we were hearing is this is important to us, but you're not performing the way we want you to. So the next thing we looked at is, well, why are the streets in the condition that they're in? And this is when the story begins to be told. If you look historically, we have spent about an average of $500,000. You'll see a bump here. This is when we had a fund balance with some savings through different cost savings and reductions, and we were able to use that extra fund savings for those 3 years, but they're gone. They're not ongoing revenue, which means we go back down to that average of about $500,000 every year. When you combine that with how much it costs to build a street of $300,000, you can see the issue that we're having. So if we have $500,000 and it costs about $300,000 per block, now some are wider, some are shorter, all of that kind of stuff, but about $300,000, we're lucky if we get 2 blocks done every year from a road construction perspective. It's already been mentioned, but we have almost the same amount of miles from here to Walsenburg. So that's a lot of streets to maintain for $500,000 a year. Additionally, we estimate that of those streets, about 1/3 of them need to be completely rebuilt. So that's taken down to the base with more base added in and reconstructed. And so that's a very, very expensive project that we have in front of us. As also mentioned tonight, the candidates have done a wonderful job of this presentation. There are other treatments for our streets, and they're much cheaper. So you go from $300,000 down to $70,000 to do an overlay, which can add about 10 to 15 years, or $27,000 for a slurry seal, which can add 5 years. So these are treatments that we do and we want to continue to do to extend the life of our streets. The problem is they can only be applied to streets that are in adequate condition. So that 1/3 of the streets that we talked about needing to be reconstructed, we cannot do this treatment on them because it does not do anything for them. So when we started looking at this, it was, well, can we just get people to shop more in Alamosa? Don't go on the internet, don't go to Pueblo, don't do all of that stuff, just shop more in Alamosa. If you look at 2018, we actually had a banner year. So we had 4.63% more shopping in Alamosa. Cities would love to have that. It's a banner year. But here's what it brings in, $283,000. And we're not going to have banner years every year. So a banner year brings in about 1 block's worth of sales tax. But the problem is we can't use that entirely just for streets. So for example, if our health insurance goes up, that's about $28,000 that I need to cover from that $283,000. If we have increases in oil, materials, gas, anything else that you see other businesses facing, we have to cover those expenses with that funding as well. The other question we get a lot of times is what do we get from the state, the Highway User Tax Fund? We get about $260,000 a year, but that's not a high growth fund. It's only grown 4% since 2014. The other logical question we asked ourselves is, okay, if we can't grow it, can we cut it? And so keep in mind, we need $300,000 for 1 block, and the question is, what do you want us to cut from the general fund? And this is where the size of the issue becomes apparent from a cutting perspective. We can cut entire divisions and maybe either just pay for half a block, or if it's the city managers, if you cut mine, we can pay for a full block. You cut city council, you get 1/3 of a block. Sorry, guys. You can cut economic development and you get half a block. A lot of times people talk about the art program. Well, we have to not do the art program for a lot of years before we can afford just 1 block from a street perspective. And then sometimes people are like, okay, well, don't bother me with these details, just cut. Cut people and put that towards the streets. And so what we did is we took all our general fund costs, that's the salaries, retirement, health insurance, all of those. We took out public safety because I don't think anyone wants me to cut a police officer or a firefighter. We took out streets, and that total amount from a budget perspective is 2.7. So in order to get 1.3, which is what this tax would bring in, I would need to cut almost half of all general fund employees. When we realized that we can't cut and we can't grow out of this, City Council created the Citizen Street Committee, and the committee was tasked with prioritizing the streets if the sales tax were to be passed. We had 2 volunteers from each ward, 2 at large, and 2 representing a business perspective. The first two meetings, they identified 80 streets for almost 22 miles. And then when we applied the funding constraint, so we have 500,000 from the general fund and 1.3 from the new tax, we were able to prioritize 16 streets for the next 10 years for about 7.5 miles. Additionally, everyone has recognized the importance of the ongoing maintenance, and so they've also recommended 400,000 every year for both the slurry and overlay programs and a sidewalk program. City Council took those recommendations, made minor changes to the timing, and they passed Resolution 13. It was approved unanimously. It includes that 400,000, and this is where I'm going to speed up because you have all of these streets listed on that handout that's on your chair. Council wanted residents to know when they could expect the street to get done. So for those 10 years, they broke it up into thirds. So for the first third, this tax would pay for, they identified the overlays. It would finish First Street, and we would do State Avenue between 6th and 13th. If the tax is not passed, the only street that gets worked on in that same time frame is First Street. For the second time frame, from 2024 through 2027, you have Victoria, Washington, Pike, Levita, 2nd, West 6th, and 7th Street. If the tax is not passed, we would finish First Street, and we would do about 1 block on State Avenue. And for the last third, you would see Poncha, West 7th, Tremont, Maroon, Graff, and Alamosa Avenue. And I think you guys got the point. If the tax doesn't pass, we would do a few more blocks on State Avenue. So we have 16 streets identified through the tax and 1.5 that would get done without the tax. Now, the resolution locks in how the funding can be spent. If the street is not listed in this resolution, we cannot spend the sales tax on it. It's ironclad. And so what council realized is, what if we get good bids? What if we can get a grant? What if we can extend it and there's funding left over after 10 years? So what they did is they identified these streets that would be eligible for that funding. This is a map. The green is those streets that would be fully reconstructed. The purple is for the first 2 years that we did identify where the overlays would be, but keep in mind with 400,000 a year, you will see a lot more purples when the 10 years is done. But here's the green to show where the layout is of the streets that were identified. Here's a sales tax that was mentioned of how we compare to other communities. This is what the portion that stays with the municipality. This is the total impact to a shopper perspective. You can see from Durango, if Monte Vista is successful with theirs, Pueblo, Salida's over here, Trinidad. So there are communities that we are comparable to. The question is, do you think someone's going to drive half an hour or longer to save $5, $10 that this tax might create for what their shopping expedition would be? This is the key part of the presentation. When people receive their ballots in the mail, this is what they will see. This is the ballot language. And here is the key part. The money can only be used solely to fund street maintenance and improvements for those streets identified in Resolution 13, 2019, and for no other purpose. Since this language is in the ballot, that means it doesn't matter what happens with staff or city council. We can change, our priorities can change, but these projects do not change because they're in the ballot language. If they're going to change, it has to go back before voters, and voters would have to approve it. Here's the 10-year period, and then there's the half cent. And then in summary, Keith, I'm trying to keep it fast. It's a half-cent dedicated tax. We estimate about $1.3 million annually. We will continue to put $500,000 from the general fund. It does sunset after 10 years. It will go into its own fund. It will not be commingled with the other city revenues. All of the projects are 100% identified up front. Half of the tax is paid by non-residents. And here's a reminder for the impact on the shoppers. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for Heather? Sure.
Yes, the half penny that you're identifying, there's a half penny in the budget right now. Is this an additional half penny?
No, this is, so the budget we did now, we did as if the tax did not pass. So it's not an additional. It's the 500 that we know for the next 10 years we will be able to do.
And that has been, it wasn't been, but it was 400 or 500 for the last several years.
Well, so you can see, 2016, we did about 653. The 19, 18, and 17, we were able to get a little bit above $1 million with the one-time savings. I put 500. I think in 2020 we have, I think it's 700,000 to be honest, and then but it starts dropping, and our general fund line is starting to go like this. Mm-hmm.
I have a question, Heather. Based on the meeting I was at last year, it was mentioned that First Street would be on hold next year. Is that still the case, with or without the tax?
First Street will get done. So the way we have it planned with the tax is it's the first thing to get done, and the thing without the tax is for all those chunks of years, First Street's the only thing that gets done until the end. There's a few blocks of State. So State actually got pushed up above Victoria. That's the only thing that's changed.
So with the committee, how did they determine to go just up
I'm sorry. How did they determine the length?
I know that some of the developments there on the edge of Belmont are newly developed, it's still okay. So like on Ross, it was 7.
So here, let me help explain what I think your question is. And so I think your question was some of these streets, so you'll see on State Avenue, it's from 6th Street to 13th, but obviously State Avenue is longer than that. It goes all the way to Airport. So how did we determine the lengths? So there's Ross, State, and I think one other street that is exceptionally long, and so we had to break it up, and then they prioritized it. So they still could have prioritized all of State, like both sections, but where I think they saw the natural break in State is you can almost visualize the sidewalk stop. It becomes kind of a different type of street when you're driving State when you go further south. So I think they felt that towards the north part of the railroad and moving south was bumpier and probably needed more immediate, so that rated higher. But again, they had 80 streets that they thought needed to be done. So there's some of the dirt streets that didn't even make this priority. So that section of State made the cut. The other section did not. So it's not a matter of them saying it's not important. It was a matter of we could only do so many streets. There were sections, and I don't want to speak out of turn on specific streets, but I do know there were sections on some streets, and it may have been Ross as well, that you have this mismatch of some's county and some's the city and those types of things. And some of them actually weren't even city streets that they identified. But those are going to take some partnership with the county in order to work on them.
Keith, I just want to extend a compliment to Heather, and the staff, the council, and the community for providing input on this street issue. The depth that you went to evaluate this, and the controls, including the ballot question, are solid. We've got some fun things with the first council support, and this is the non-sexy stuff that has to be done. It's so critical to our enjoyment of living in the city and economic development. The impression that it leaves on businesses and other people considering what we do. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So I only have a couple of questions left. We can either take a short break or we can continue through these two questions and wrap it up for the night. Let's get through it. All right. I like it. So all candidates, and Ms. Brooks, you probably will be interested in this question. Do you think that the city budget and financial report should be totally, quote, transparent, unquote? That is, the public should have access to the fine details of these reports. And Christina, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. So I think the question is asking that they're just not getting enough, they don't see enough detail in the things that are coming on that are accessible.
That that's the intent of the question, that the public should have access to the fine details of those reports.
You know, I think none of what I see of our spending is secret or private. It's our community's money. I think the challenge that comes with that, though, is when you get into the details, then you have to be prepared for the reasons and the understandings of the operations of the city. And so working in operations for as long as I have for different things, knowing all of those finite details and all of those things, that can get pretty messy for people when they don't understand the day-to-day needs. So I think it's something we want to do. It's something we want to see. I think it would be something I would be open to as a council member. Say, if you want to dig in, let's dig in, but then be prepared for the conversations about why we made the choices we made. As city council, we're like a board. We give the staff direction and vision, and they carry out our vision for us and our vision for the city. And so there's also a certain amount of trust, but I do know that our team would be absolutely willing, able, and ready to answer any of those finite detail questions if someone really wanted to know.
Thank you, Christina. Rob, your take on that?
You know, I would tend to agree with Christina. I mean, you know, the budgeting process, especially for an entity like the city, you know, and when you start getting down to the nitty-gritty details, you know, there are so many things that encompass those decisions or those dollars or whatever the case may be. But I believe, and I could be wrong, if someone has that interest and that desire to dig that far in the budget, that I think that that city staff, you know, would take the time to be able to let them know. But again, you know, some of those decisions are, in some cases, judgment calls that you have to make, you know, based on what you think will happen, because you have to understand that a budget is somewhat of a working document, and in many cases, you're not going to be exactly to the dollar, based on what it is. But again, I could be mistaken, but I think if someone wants to dig that deep, that I think the opportunity would be there for them to do that.
Thank you, Rob. Liz?
So I'm going to echo with what both Christina and Rob said, because I agree totally. I think it's a fine balance of how much information is too much information, and again, maybe for the average person. So there may be somebody who wants more of that really, really specific detail. They really understand it. They'd like to look into that. They understand what it's saying, and they know how to read it. And so again, I would agree with Rob. I think if somebody really wants those specifics, they probably can request it, and they can get that information. But again, for some people, that would be almost too much overload. And it could almost be so much information that it's even harder to understand, especially for people who don't see that on a day in and day out basis. So I kind of think it's that fine line and trying to find that balance of what's giving the right amount of detail. The one thing I can say is I feel very comfortable is that we are very transparent as a city. And if there is any specifics that are needed, I know it would be something we could definitely show, and it would show how we got to the number that you're seeing. So.
Thank you, Liz. Charlie?
I believe that they are transparent because the amount of budget work sessions that we have, we go over that budget over and over, and it's open to the public. The public can come and maybe they can't participate, but they can at least try to learn of how it's put together and so forth. We have public hearings afterwards. We'll have for a couple of years there, we've had public hearings to let people come, look at the budget, ask questions, you know, and then we have a separate public hearing that when we pass it. So there's opportunity to come and look at it. If they have problems, we have a city manager. That's her job. Her job is, if you have a question with any part of that budget, give her a call, come in. And it is also our responsibility to make sure as elected officials, as representatives of the people, that this is transparent. And if they have problems, that's why we're there to get called on, and if there's questions, give us those questions. So I think it is a transparent report.
All right, thank you, Charlie. All right, our last question to all candidates. Charlie, I'm going to start with you since you went last on the last question. How important to you is protecting the Alamosa Ranch as open space and not allowing any changes except agricultural or recreational?
Well, I'm the only person sitting on this council right now that was on that council that made the purchase of that ranch. And we bought that ranch back then because we were having problems with our levees. We were having to repair our levees, and we were going to have to pay, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of dollars in just dirt and stuff. So we bought that. Back then, we put together boundaries of how we were going to use that ranch, and it should stay open. There's sections in there that I believe, and back then there's belief that could be used for economic development. You know, there's sections out there that nothing can grow on it. But there is a lot of sections in there that today we are using for recreation, and we're trying to keep it where people can enjoy it. So it's something that, it is a jewel. Back then we got, I don't know how many awards because we went ahead and bought that ranch. And today it's working for the people, and it belongs to the people to use it, you know, so.
Thank you, Charlie. Liz?
So I definitely think the open space is very important. I think one of the things that came up in the last few years was when there was the potential of the RV park to come in, and I know that was very controversial. And it was that idea, I think it brought to light to set up some true boundaries and to set up, hey, how are we going to break or look at this open space? And sort of like what Charlie said, there may be a couple of little sections that really, if there was going to be some economic development, those would be the ideal places, and making sure we're not plopping it in the middle of where it's perfect open space. And so after that whole RV park discussion was the idea of let's now set this up and map this, and where's the best place to have maybe some recreational type of things going on, some agricultural, and picking out just those couple little spots for economic development. But I totally agree. I love what we did and set that up and have those boundaries set so the next time something comes up, we can sort of see where it would fit and the places it would go, so that we do keep that value and we don't get lost. And at the same time, if city council changes or staff changes, we've set up some guidelines already to honor and respect that open space.
Thank you, Liz. Rob?
I agree. You know, the ranch is a real gem for Alamosa. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, didn't you put together a plan for the ranch? Some areas would be transitional, and am I mistaken there? Seems like I went to a meeting with you at the rec center. Yeah.
No, so yes, we did a lot of public outreach to develop a ranch management plan, and there's areas for low-impact recreation, maybe a high-impact recreation in other areas, and then a smaller area for economic development.
So, you know, I think that there indeed is a plan in place, and based on what, you know, I saw, you know, I think it was a good plan. I think one of the things that we always need to be cognizant of and aware of is that part of the ranch that's used for agriculture, that part of the ranch is being used wisely, that those folks who are leasing that land for particularly their cattle, that they're not overgrazing, that they're doing the right thing by that. And I think that we need to be aware of the areas that are open space. I think the trails that are available on the ranch and will be available on the ranch are a great economic development item for the city of Alamosa, for people to come, to walk, to ride, to bikes, to do whatever. So I'm certainly in favor of maintaining the ranch and with the plan that we have in force.
Thank you, Rob. Christina?
Thank you. I believe we're all going to say very much the same thing. Our ranch management plan is very important to how we manage this asset of the city and how we make sure that people have access, whatever that access looks like for them. Anytime we have an asset of this size, of this magnitude, of this beauty, and as much impact to our community, we have to make sure that we're balancing all sides and all needs. I'm very proud of the ranch management plan. I think, again, there was a lot of time, energy, and effort put into that. One of the things I think the team has done very well, especially in recent years, is doing a lot of community outreach and getting community input in order to make sure we're not just making decisions outside of what the community sees, or needs. Having community input and community open space and using that wisely and fairly and appropriately is necessary. Our ranch management plan was developed, I think, very intentionally, and we're working to make sure that as we look at economic development opportunities, as we look at further recreational opportunities, that we don't overuse it. I think Rob was very right that the ranchers who are using that land now are doing a very good job managing it appropriately, and that as we continue to monitor and look at opportunities for development, all of the aspects and that balance piece, which again is our job as city council, is to ensure that we're balanced, will be taken into consideration every single time, and the groundwork is there in this ranch management plan.
All right, thank you, Christina. I think our candidates have done a very good job tonight being candid and truthful and telling us about themselves and what they see as the future of Alamosa. Let's give them a round of applause. So in closing, just on behalf of the Valley Courier, the Alamosa County Chamber of Commerce, the City of Alamosa, I appreciate you being here. My thanks to Kaylee and Tom for their assistance tonight. And we wish you well, and don't forget to vote. Thank you.